All right. Hi, Robert.
You're on.
All right. So today we want to continue our conversation from last time about feedback and the importance of feedback and the importance of getting feedback, being objective about it, learning from it, testing. We talked a little bit about that within organizations, CDC, post-COVID, maybe the FAA has done a better job, obviously. But we wanted to bring it down to kind of the individual level because there's a lot of things we do. I mean, all of us in life that are uncertain, that we're not certain about outcomes. We're not certain about methodology, and how do we develop both an attitude and mentality of feedback, and what kind of feedback should we be seeking?
And I think it's really important, not just at the individual level, because everything wells up from the individual level. I assert that the FAA has done a good job because someone with the right mindset and the right commitments was in a position of authority and influence, and that the CDC did a terrible job because they didn't have that person. And so if we somehow were to inoculate all Americans with the idea that seeking feedback and embracing the lessons from failure is the way that you're successful in life and you produce the results that you want, we would have had a much better chance of the CDC, having the right culture. It's going to come from individuals somewhere, and
no question. Yeah.
So we can all make our own lives better, but we can also make institutions better if we internalize this idea. And if you look at your own life, it's really hard. I mean, we've got a lot going on. We're busy. Taking time out to really think about what are the structures that I'm going to have for feedback in my life. How am I going to make sure that I'm paying attention to that feedback and that I have the right incentive to take that feedback? It's not simple. In theory, it's simple, but we all know in practice, it's not that simple.
No, I mean, generally, I think people struggle in evaluating themselves, evaluating their own life, and taking control over their own time. I mean, that's probably the biggest challenge people have. But it might be the most important thing they do in their life is to actually be thoughtful about what you're doing and take control over what you're doing rather than just drift into what's comfortable.
And once you find something that seems like it's kind of working, it's very natural to say, okay, if it's not broke, I'm not going to try and fix it. And that's all anti-ingenuism.
And I think it's anti-life as a consequence. It's anti-successful life. I mean, part of what, it's important for people, go out there and take risks and try things. But having the right kind of feedback is partially how you learn from taking risk. If you just take risk for the sake of taking risk, that could end badly. But if you actually do it in order to enhance your life, improve your life, and you're constantly learning from it and monitoring and fully aware of it, it'll make a life worth living, rather than.
Yeah, that's just what attracted us to Ingenuism in the first place, is that it's sort of synonymous with having a life that's worth living. It's what makes people unique. And if you don't embrace that, if you're not maximizing that, you're not maximizing your life. Yeah. So personally, I've been thinking a lot about homeschooling because our daughter is currently immune compromised, so she's not going to be going into school. And we also had a pretty terrible experience with
COVID.
Yes, the COVID situation, and she was even in a private school. So and I know that the experience was even worse in other schools, particularly public schools. And yet, despite having spent most of my professional life as an educator, I really have no idea how this should go. And I'm going to be doing it once. And it's really easy to say, well, I'm not going to do a terrible job, and I can read a few books, and I won't know for 15 years, or 20 years or 30 years, how badly I screwed up. So let's just make the best of it and roll with that. And that's not a terrible attitude. I'm not not a terrible parent, in my opinion, for having that first thought. But it isn't very ingenuous. And I think that the same principles that we talked about last week of identifying structures, putting them in place to get feedback. And the feedback, I imagine it being her having a successful life and a career that she loves and thrives in and makes a ton of money and all of that. But it could be as simple as, did she enjoy learning today? And once I get into that mindset, then there's an opportunity for lots of learning over the next year, 2 years, 5 years that could really make a difference. And I see very quickly that if the one thing I do is somehow instill in her this idea of that learning, education is about figuring out where you could have done better, where you made mistakes, what might have failed, and learning from that, then maybe that'll be half the battle.
I think that's a huge part of the battle. I mean, a big part of all of this is, I mean, to some extent, you can't control the outcome. So because you've got another human being on the other side of it, so you can do the best that you can, and you have to measure, and that's where the feedback comes in, of how well you're doing. So the goals can't be 15, 20-year goals. I mean, they have to be a love of learning. Did she learn the things that I think at this point are important? If she didn't, am I wrong about them being important, or am I bad about how I taught it? I mean, those are the kind of intermediate or short-term goals I think one has to set for something like that. And the nice thing is that homeschooling is not new, for example. There's lots of other people who've done it. Hopefully there are people out there who've been self-aware in a sense that they've monitored what worked and what didn't, and sharing those stories. So hopefully there's good literature out. I don't know, but hopefully there's good literature about this out there. Yeah, and then it's about being really conscious of what you're doing and not getting into routines that are just comfortable.
And being willing to adjust the whole feedback structure, because that's really my challenge here, is that not only don't I know how to be a successful homeschooler, but I don't know what the right structures are to learn as I go and become a better homeschooler. So it feels like an overwhelming challenge, and it's not, because every day there's going to be an opportunity to learn something, and the key is to make sure that we're paying attention and that we're having, not in an abstract sense, but we actually have a structure in place.
I think one of the barriers a lot of people encounter with the whole idea of feedback is that they worry that if they're wrong, something's bad about them, right? They have the self-esteem issue of it reflects badly on them, or how will other people look at me? How will other people view me? And I think to be an ingenuist in this context, the focus needs to be on the truth, right? On what is real, to the extent that I can tell what the truth is, that's what should motivate me and drive me. And the truth is never a barrier, shouldn't never hurt your ego, and should never, who cares what other people think? So and that kind of mentality, I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that mentality, right? They'll shift on a dime, they'll change, they'll hire, they'll fire. That's what makes really successful entrepreneurs. And I think that's really makes successful human beings at living.
And we sometimes relate to entrepreneurs like they're extremely driven, which they are, and they're extremely focused, which they are, and that they're extremely committed to a particular outcome, which they kind of are. The outcome is very general. I met a CEO of a tech company years and years ago, and we were talking about this in a related sense. And he said that, the most important thing he does in his role is that he carries all of his opinions like in a box around with him. Because as soon as they become his opinions and not just opinions that he's carrying around in this box, then they become really hard to change. And he notices that when he has an opinion, he always wants to defend it. But if it's just something that is what he knows as of right now, then it becomes really easy to discard it. And the same thing is true for your strategy. The same thing is true for your hiring plans. The same thing is true for your homeschooling plans. as long as you're willing to make that change and not have that, it's like the victory of having learned and then moving to something that's even better outweighs the fact that, yeah, I was doing the wrong thing yesterday, but I had to because that was the only way I could learn.
Yes, I mean, too many people have kind of their self-esteem tied up in being right versus in being right in the past versus in being right in the future, which or being learning and getting to be right, and that inhibits learning. It makes people defensive when they're criticized. I mean, I like to tell, when criticized, the ideal is when somebody gives you feedback, negative feedback. I mean, there are only two options, right? They're either right or they're wrong. And if they're wrong, why do you care? It's their problem. And if they're right, you should thank them because you just learned something you didn't know 5 minutes earlier. So it's that kind of attitude towards orientation on truth, on fact, rather than on who's right and who's wrong in any particular moment is I think really important for health, for growth, and for being ingenuous in your life.
And I think, and we disagree a little bit at the margin on this, and I think that's also that relating to world as facts. There are clear truths in the world. Like there are facts, but most of them have to do with physical objects with a particular time and a place. And so you can say, yes, this tree is here. And if you want to get existential, I suppose you can argue about that. But I'm not interested in that. You're not interested in that. And Ingenuist is not interested in that. But if you're looking at the question of what will make this tree grow the fastest, then there are things that feel like facts, like sunshine and water and all of these things. It's so obvious that they feel like facts, and they're not quite. Or as soon as you begin to relate to them, then they become immutable in the same sense that the tree's existence is immutable.
Well, there is a fact regarding whether trees will grow under these. The question is, do you know it, right? So I think you're right. Most people feel it because they don't know the science. They don't understand the causal relationship. They don't actually know the relationship between all these things. But I do think there is an underlying reality that says that, yeah, certain things will make the tree grow faster and certain things will not. And most, and to really hold that, you have to have a lot of knowledge. And most of our knowledge is superficial, like somebody told us, or we read it in the book when we were 5 or something, and we remember it, but we don't know it, right? Some things we know, and some things we kind of hold, but we don't really have a solid understanding of.
And even if it's not that to that level, I mean, we were talking last week about the fiasco of Alzheimer's research. Yeah. And how now this was actually, it seems like it was fraud, but there was a truth.
Well, one study, I mean, there's controversy about how important that study was, but yes, there certainly was a combination of both maybe fraud and a lot of entrenched beliefs that were inflexible to being challenged.
And those were held out as facts. Yep. And we see that, and we saw that with COVID and people being wrong. We see it with climate change, and people are going to be wrong. People are going to be wrong because that is the process of science. You're right, and as much as you're right, and you're wrong in certain areas. And if we're doing it correctly, we're slowly moving towards this hypothetical truth. But if it's a complex question, I believe we're never going to get there. The journey is, science is the journey. It's not actually the destination. And this is where we disagree at the edges. But the point is that we agree on 98% of it, which is if we are not looking for where we're wrong, mm-hmm. Then we're not actually trying to learn. And I actually read an article earlier this week about the idea of reminding people to drive safely as they're driving on the freeway. So you'll see sometimes these traffic highway signs that will say stuff like 93 people killed on this road in the last year, which is obviously you should drive carefully, because if you don't, you could be the 94th. And these kind of things have been being putting up. Don't text and drive. They've been being put up for years. And in Texas, they were using the death statistic on the freeways. And someone thought to actually look at the data. Like, if we are reminding people to drive safely, how many lives do we think we're saving? Well, let's actually see. And they found that for the mile after that message, and it's a great test because you either have the message on the sign or you don't. You have cars going by all the time. And so when the message goes up, the accident rate for the next mile skyrockets. And I don't know why. I can make up a story why, but the data is that it goes up like 3 or 4x, something enormous, and that it stays high for something 20 or 25 miles. That message has the exact opposite result in practice, in reality, of what we might think it would have. And of course, that's what everyone thought it would have, because they would never have put it up if they go, let's kill some people, let's put up this message. They're trying to save lives.
Yeah, I've noticed that if there's a cop driving behind me, side of me, I become a worse driver. I'm slower maybe, but now my attention is on the cop. Why is he behind me? Did I do something? Is he going to stop me? And it's off the road. Or if Waze tells me there's a speed trap in a mile, I'll slam on the brakes, which is probably not the best thing you should be doing. So I get why, if you distract people in certain ways, you're going to get the opposite intention of what you wanted. But yes, those are easy because the nice thing about that is you can test it. Hopefully there's a mechanism by which those get taken down when they prove to be ineffective. I'm not sure there is, but that would be nice if this research actually resulted in the things coming down.
I believe that it has in Texas.
The best sign in Texas that they've ever come up with in Texas is the signs on the side of the road that just says, "Don't mess with Texas." And it's just, and that's it. And you just have to behave, otherwise you're going to be screwed.
See, we could probably test that theory because it sounds good, but
the "don't mess with Texas" is about what do you call it? Littering, throwing stuff out the car window and stuff like that. But it's just it's just a great term. It worked on me. It makes you scared just saying "don't mess with Texas." Oh my God, what are they going to do? But yes, that is testable too.
And in our lives, that we have lots of opportunities to do this, and we do it sort of instinctually, but we could do so much more. And it's falling, and this is, again, I'm going to deviate from how you like to view the world. We all behave irrationally. And what we can do to be rational is to put brackets around the irrationality. So from a purely rational perspective, I like peanut M&Ms. And so I should keep a bowl of peanut M&Ms next to me, because every moment I have the option of either eating one or not. And if it's going to give me happiness and satisfaction, I should eat one. And if it's just going to make me fat, I shouldn't. And in theory, that would work great, but I know from experience that in practice, it's a terrible idea. And so I don't keep peanut M&Ms in a bowl next to me. And in fact, I don't keep them in the house. And that's a rational response to what happens if I have peanut M&Ms sitting around all the time. But that is exactly the rational part of it. That's the learning is, you learn over time. What are the things that screw up my sleep? What are the things that screw up my diet? What are the things that screw up my exercise routine? What are the things that screw up my productivity at work? What are the things that screw up my marriage? Like there's an infinite list of errors we can make in life, and we're going to make a lot of them. But if we learn from them, then over time, our lives just get better and better and better. And we all have examples of where we've done that, gotten rid of the peanut M&Ms. But being present to the opportunity and actually taking the feedback, because it's often conflated with, in the case of the M&Ms, the short-term joy of crunching down on one of those little
I don't even know
Well,
what that
also
is,
chocolate,
and
but
maybe I shouldn't know because
you
maybe it's better that I
probably,
don't know.
yeah, it's well, for you, I remember it was an ice cold, fully loaded, caffeinated, sugared can of Coke.
You remember that? I used to drink 6, 7 of those a day or
You
something.
would, and there's the smile on your face when you would crack it open, and
Oh,
the sound it
loved
would
it.
make, and that first
Loved it.
taste when it's the coldest. And then you stopped, and it wasn't because you stopped liking it. It was because you had learned that the cost was higher than the benefit. You know, the long-term costs, or the long-term benefits typically get underweighted in our minds, and you have to be really careful not to have that be. But
Mhm.
sometimes it's as simple as not knowing, because you're not paying attention.
Well, that's the thing. It's the paying attention that you know, it would be helpful for people just to start paying attention to some things are obvious, and people get on health things and they focus on that, or they get on I don't know. I think a lot of people are aware at work that they want to get better and they want to achieve certain things at work, but to have it as kind of a given that you want to do this in every aspect of your life and to apply it to every aspect of your life requires effort and requires choices and requires mental energy. But again, if it's good for your career and it's good for your health, it's probably good for everything else that you do. So why not get in the habit of just constantly evaluating?
And habit is the right way to put it, because when something becomes a habit, it becomes a lot less onerous.
Yep.
The mental energy to do something goes down over time as you acclimate to it. And of course, you have to be careful not to get complacent, or if you get complacent at a higher level, maybe that's fine. But it's easy to say, okay, now what I'm doing is enough.
Yeah.
And maybe it is, you know, that's perfectly fine if it is, but having that be a conscious choice rather than just inertia is really important. And so one of the things I'm doing is trying to learn an explicit lesson in areas of life. You know, for me, it's marriage, parenting, or fatherhood, and right now trying to get back into shape. And if I can just learn one thing a week, you know, what is something that really does make a difference? What did I do wrong this week? And, you know, I've learned that if I don't work out in the morning, then I don't work out, even though the afternoon would be much better for me
Much
from
better.
my
I'm
schedule
with you.
perspective.
I'm with you.
It's,
Yeah.
you know, and so that's one of the ways that I think just the commitment, and then the structure of, okay, if every weekend I can't say I learned something, then, you know, I need to do something different.
And if it turned out that it was really, really important for you to work out in the afternoons, you would find a way to make it work. That is, it also is an issue of how motivated are you to make a particular change or not, and how important that change is, or how important that difference is.
That's absolutely
because
right.
sometimes the standards need to change over time, the measurements need to change over time.
Or you need to do something that enables it. If let's just say, you know, you said your family will be killed if you don't start working out in the afternoon. I promise you, I would start working out in the afternoon.
Absolutely.
And what I would be doing though is I'd be experimenting on what are the things that make that more palatable and easier to actually build into my life. And that's actually a great framework that I've never thought of until right now. Is if I started to think about, if I had to do something, if the consequences were so dire that I had to do it, what would be the things I would do to make it possible? Because right now I just think about, working out in the afternoon. I could do that, obviously, but I'm not going to. If I had to, I'd start thinking about what is it that's going to do. I have to, you know, go to bed an hour earlier? Do I have to? And I don't know, because I've never asked the question. That's the beauty of it, is once you start asking questions, then you start getting some idea of the answers.
Absolutely. So how does this all fit with, I mean, typically when we've talked about Ingenuism, we've talked about markets, and we've talked about firms, and we've talked about, how does this all fit with Ingenuism? Do you see Ingenuism as applying kind of to how individuals live their life?
Absolutely. I think in a sense, it's most important at that level, not just because individuals are important because they make up everything, but because you could, as an individual, find yourself in the right environment, the right firm or the right organization, the right group of friends, and start benefiting from the asking questions, learning, taking feedback. Whereas at the individual level, it's all you.
Yeah.
So it feeds in both directions. So organizations are going to be more ingenuous if individuals are, and individuals are going to benefit, guaranteed to benefit if we adopt ingenuous principles. But it takes a structure. And you made an interesting point at the beginning about risk. Like there's roller coaster risk where you're just taking it for the thrill.
Yep.
You might jump off of cliffs with parachutes. You might watch scary movies. It doesn't matter. That's all entertainment, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the kind of risks that are very asymmetric, where the costs are low. So not jumping off a cliff with a parachute, and the benefits are high. And the asymmetry isn't in the moment; it's in the long term.
Yep.
And the example I always fall back to is, because for me it's very real, is for a lot of my adult life, I didn't try new foods because I knew what I liked. And if I tried new foods, it was probably going to be inferior. My experience was that I wasn't going to like it as much. Except then you miss out on the 10% of new foods that turn out to be even better than what you like now, or going to new places, or
expanding your palate so you actually learn to like things you didn't like before. Maybe we're still working on that one.
Yeah, let's not go crazy here. But it is very asymmetric, and people. It's a short-term, long-term thing, I think, but people don't behave that way. I know that I don't regularly. That it takes some effort and commitment for me to do the exploration and to not just go with what I know works or what I know I like. And then once you discover things, the feedback is immediate. Like, oh my God, I love mussels and mussel butter. And then once you have it, then you have it for the rest of your life. And this is something that I'm definitely committed to. I don't know if it's part of homeschooling, but I guess ideally, I think homeschooling is sort of life schooling, and that this have been much more valuable to me, 25 or 35 or 45 years ago than it is today. That doesn't diminish how valuable it is today, but it would have been way more valuable when I was younger and had more time to benefit from the things that I could discover.
The other thing about what we talked about today that I think is important is you get to control this, right? So an individual can actually control how he lives his life to a large extent, how he uses his mind, whether he accepts the feedback and does that. When you go into an organization, you're often not going to be in control. You might have the right attitude and everything and your bosses or other coworkers might not have them, and they might restrain you. In the world of politics, you have no control. A lot of the world around you, we have very little control over what happens. In our personal lives, we actually have control. And that's where we should really take the best principles, the best ideas, and apply them, because we actually control we can control the inputs, maybe not always the outcome, but we get to the outcome, because if we iterate, we'll get there. So, people obsess about and worry and stress and about things they have no control over. And they don't put the kind of energy and effort and focus and thought into the things they actually do. And it should be the other way around.
Yeah, politics is a great example of,
yes.
We complain a lot about what's happening in Washington, which, may affect us, but we have no control over, and our complaining does nothing.
Yep.
And you're exactly right. If we're counting on our environment to carry us into ingenuous principles, we could get lucky, or we could get unlucky. And we're just putting ourselves at the mercy of circumstances. Whereas when we're committed to ingenuism and to exploration, to discovering what really works for us, and then continuing to experiment and expand, then we're going to always have that, even if we're in a crappy environment, and we're going to impact that environment, to some extent. We may have no control, but we don't have zero impact,
Impact,
even in politics, although it's close to zero.
It's close to zero.